The first question most people ask, does it involve water? Do I have to go for a swim? Do I need to take my clothes off? And the answer to all of those things is no. It's about being in an outdoor tree-filled atmosphere and soaking it up.
This is The Butterfly Effect, a podcast that shows the big impact a small action can do. Tali Orad is talking to those special people that make a difference with nature and trees.
Welcome everyone to The Butterfly Effect. My name is Tali Orad. I'm your host and your butterfly here. My special guest today is Katie Mills. Katie is a London-based nature connector. She is the founder and director of Forest and Family, which is a London forest school and nature connection organization promoting the links between nature, health, and well-being. She is also the founder of Forest Bathing London, which is dedicated to promoting and supporting the Japanese practice of forest bathing in London and for Londoners. Welcome, Katie, to The Butterfly Effect.
Hi, Tali. Thanks for having me.
I did not mention in my intro that you're also a forest bathing guide, which I'm assuming was the reason for you to start Forest Bathing London.
Exactly. I've been working in the field of nature connection now for 5 years, and it started with a venture into forest school, which led on to an interest and passion for forest bathing. So I'm now bridging both of those fields of nature connection.
Not everybody knows that it's obviously not taking a shower or a bath in forest. I would love for you to start by just explaining what it is.
It's a practice, it's a feeling, it's an approach to spending intentional time in nature, particularly around trees. It's about using our minds and our bodies to sort of bring ourselves into balance with the natural world.
When did it start?
As a practice, what we talk about when we talk about forest bathing, it's age old, but the term forest bathing, or Shinrin-yoku, which is its original Japanese name, I think it was first coined in the 1980s, where the Japanese government had launched a public health program around bringing people into more natural environments, particularly forest environments, to improve public health and well-being. And that's where the term was first sort of coined. And Shinrin means forest in Japanese. Yoku means bath or shower. So it's a literal translation. It is translated as taking in the forest atmosphere. So like soaking up and bathing in a forest atmosphere. And of course, the first question most people ask is, does it involve water? Do I have to go for a swim? Do I need to take my clothes off? And the answer to all of those things is no. It's about being in an outdoor tree-filled atmosphere and soaking it up.
What's the difference between this and just hiking in nature without your phone?
The main difference is that forest bathing it's a journey, not a destination. So the first difference in comparison to a hike is you're not aiming to get, from A to B. You're not focusing on going a distance. Most forest bathing walks don't actually cover that far a distance. And that's because the practice is really about slowing down. And so a forest bathing walk is very much a slow, mindful wander. And it's about connecting with nature that is around us. It's about using all of our 5 senses, or 6 senses if you want to include that elusive 6th sense. But it's about using our sight, hearing, our touch, sense of touch and smell and taste as much as we can during a forest bathing walk. So it's a very sensory rich and highly personal walking experience.
And do you do it by yourself? Do you do it with a group? How does it work?
So forest bathing can be done on your own, absolutely. I mean, all of the things that we do in a forest bathe can be done by an individual going out into a woodland or a forest environment, or even within a park environment. If you don't have a local forest bathing group or guide near to you, then that's no reason not to give forest bathing a try. But having a guide I feel, is probably the best way to introduce yourselves to forest bathing.
What does the guide do that is different than what we can do by ourselves?
A good forest bathing guide will facilitate a walk that will really provide you with a framing for the forest bathe. In my own practice, I like to use themes for when I take groups out, and sort of framing each forest bathing, not only in terms of the invitations that I'll choose to use, but maybe using poetry or literary references or stories that kind of weave together an experience as well as a bit of a narrative around why we're doing the forest bathe. And of course, where you can, bringing in some of the amazing science around the practice as well. A guide will also remove some of the other distractions that you might have if you're doing a forest bathe on your own. You know, they'll have done an assessment of the forest bathing site. They'll have an idea of the route that you're going to take. They'll have worked out which places work best for the specific stop points, and how to sort of really sort of tailor the invitations around each unique setting that you have on your route. They will really encourage you to embrace the forest bathing process, to understand the practice and to see it as this very slow, calm, therapeutic approach. And I think we often need encouragement to slow down. It's not our natural default now, particularly with us all living in cities, and particularly in London. You know, we even walk more quickly in London than in other parts of the country. So we need some help in slowing down a lot of the time.
Right. I want us to paint a vivid picture for our listeners to try to understand what it means, because it's not a hike in the forest. It's some sort of guided walk where we use our senses for it. Can you walk us through a little bit on what it is exactly? So I'm walking in the forest. Am I sitting down a little bit, doing meditation? And am I closing my eyes? Am I touching the flowers? Am I marking things that I'm seeing? What exactly am I doing when I'm walking? How long does it take?
A forest bathing walk, best done over at least a 2-hour period if you want to get the full benefits. And as I said, you don't have to walk that far, but it's over that period of time you will be having a series of stop points where you will carry out an invitation, as we call it. So an invitation could be finding somewhere where you feel comfortable, where you can sit or stand or lie and close your eyes and just really focus on the sounds of the forest, you know, listening to the birds, the wind, the leaves rustling, the trees, the insects around you, and just taking in all those sensory elements and sort of absorbing them. Another invitation that would probably be much more personal for people would be finding a tree, just sitting back and observing that tree, and maybe thinking about how the tree reflects you. We use a lot of metaphor within forest bathing. There is a lot of looking for ourselves in nature, and I think that is one of the most powerful ways in helping people to connect with the practice on that deep level, is applying it to their own lives and thinking about what's going on in their lives that day, or in terms of circumstances or stress or worries that they're handling, and sort of exploring those in that natural environment. And if you are in a group, we tend to then, after each invitation, we will regroup and invite those that want to share about that invitation. Mm-hmm. It's very sort of relaxed, and, you know, it's very much a sort of an opportunity to give as much as you want, or to share as much as you want with others. Right. And we will then move on to a new location. So it's a short walk, a stop, an invitation, sharing, another short walk, a stop, another invitation.
Right.
And it's common as well in the practice to end with some kind of sharing of tea. That's traditionally how forest bathings work in Japan, you know, around the whole tea ceremony idea,
right,
where you will have the opportunity to share tea, typically infused with twigs or leaves or flowers or barks from the forest trees, is, you know, the best way to experience that.
That's beautiful. I actually had a tea ceremony in Japan. It's much longer than 2 hours. So yeah. I'm curious. You mentioned a lot that is some sort of reflection, but by a tree versus just, I don't know, in the meadow of flowers or lying on the grass or looking at the ocean. Is there a reason for the trees there?
It was rolled out in the 1980s as a public health initiative to respond to the health fallout that the Japanese government was seeing with large numbers of people moving from rural areas into the urban spaces and into cities, and the sort of consequences for their health and well-being was very evident. So it was trialed as this experiment, really, to see whether there was something. We innately have a sense that nature is good for us, and forests are healthy places that boost our well-being. The trees are key, and a huge amount of Japan is covered in forests, so it's the perfect place for it to start. And Japanese culture itself is so rooted in nature. The two main religions there, Buddhism and Shinto, are just absolutely steeped in their sort of connections with nature and natural spirits, and this sort of infusion of our lives with nature through those religions. It all kind of makes sense as to why this practice would start to emerge more in Japan. And of course, Japan has a high number of these very powerful trees in terms of health benefits. Typically the conifers and the evergreen trees, like the spruce and the cypress and the pines, are actually the trees that we know produce some of the highest volumes of phytoncides, which are the natural chemicals that trees produce to protect themselves from viruses and bacteria and fungus and illness. The fascinating thing that we've that has been discovered is that these phytoncides have the same benefit on the human body when we breathe them in the forest atmosphere and air. But the trees, this relationship that we have with the trees is more than just a sort of a visual impact that they have on us, but there's on a sort of cellular level, on a sort of internal physiological level, they're having a very powerful impact on our immune systems.
Wow. So you started talking about a little bit on the benefits for forest bathing. What are the benefits that we see on our physical and mental health after doing forest bathing? And then how long does it last? Do we need to continue practicing? What's the deal?
Who doesn't know that we feel better after a walk in the park? It's instinctive. We get it. But of course, we need to kind of prove it if we're going to uphold this practice as a really powerful practice for preventative health care and health management. For me, the science behind the practice is one of the most fascinating sides of it. I mean, what it's doing to our bodies, I think, it makes us think back to sort of the biophilia, which is the hypothesis around how our bodies have evolved over millions of years in a natural environment. We are primed for being outside. The US biologist E.O. Wilson was the one who really developed this hypothesis around biophilia, that we have an innate, unshakable pull towards natural environments. It's very much sort of rooted in how our bodies have evolved. And the fact is, when we come into nature, we are coming back into our true habitat, our true natural home. And it's where our bodies belong. It's where our bodies are most at ease, where they can let go of stress, where they can better manage stress, and where we can put our bodies back into that kind of rest and recovery mode. What we talk often in forest bathing around the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system, our fight or flight state or our rest and recovery state. And nature is a brilliant switch for placing us back into that all-important rest and recovery mode, where we often struggle to keep our bodies when we're living in these very busy, modern, built-up urban lifestyles. And nature does that for us, and particularly, a rich environment like a forest or a woodland. But as I touched on as well, there is powerful impacts on what's going on in terms of our immune system, in part to do with the phytoncides, the essential oils that the trees release themselves, that we breathe in when we're in a forest environment, but also within the soil itself. vaccae, which is a bacteria, a good bacteria that lives within soil that you recognize when you smell it. It's that classic earthy kind of smell that you get when you're in a woodland area, or typically when you're walking somewhere and it's just rained after it's been quite hot, and the soil, the sort of dust particles and the soil particles have lifted up and kind of hit your nose. But we know that this bacteria as well has really powerful stimulating impact on our immune system. There's initially studies were conducted with mice that showed that mice were much better at managing stress, but also it has an impact on reducing inflammation in our bodies. You think about all the different inflammatory diseases, all our main diseases that we have an increased sort of incidence of, particularly in these urban and developed countries. The environment, when we're in this natural space, is counteracting so much of that. I mean, some of the studies, the early studies, were looking at the impact of phytoncides in particular on the effect they have on our NK cells, so the natural killer cells which are in our bodies, that are the cells that fight off infection and disease and tumours. One particular study, which again was led by Dr. Jing Li, looked at taking a group of forest bathers out into the forest over a 2-day period and tracking the number and the activity of the NK cells within their bodies before the forest bathe and after the forest bathe. And what they found was that there was something about the forest bathing, the atmosphere and the practice itself, that was boosting not only the activity of those natural killer cells, but the number of natural killer cells as well.
Wow.
They found that over a 2-day forest bathing experience, that impact on our NK cells lasted up to 30 days.
Yeah.
Which is, it's a powerful message about how important it is for us to have regular time in these natural wild spaces and to make time for that in our daily lives.
I also heard that forest bathing, or actually going out to any greenery area, is helpful for children with ADHD.
The benefits are huge for children. Just being in a natural environment is really going to bring a sort of clarity of mind and focus. It boosts our ability to concentrate. It also boosts our memory as well. There's a number of studies around how being in a natural environment and then being put through a series of memory tests, just from having had that sort of that natural environment affecting them for a period of time. It's a powerful practice. The reality is, though, children instinctively get forest bathing. I don't think children particularly need to be encouraged to be, to observe and to use their senses when they're outdoors. They tend to get it instinctively, and I think in many ways it's the adults that I think need to be brought back into this particular practice with the sort of guided approach, because we are generally so disconnected now from nature in our lifestyles. We've never needed the natural world more. We've never needed these wild forest and woodland environments more, but we've never been so disconnected from them. I think there is a whole re-education or reconnection process that's needed amongst the adult population of so many countries.
And we're also now talking during a global pandemic. You're in London, I'm in New York. So during this global pandemic, issue rises with both kids and adults, as we are socially distancing and we are isolated. And I'm just thinking, can forest bathing help with that?
Yeah, forest bathing is a part of that solution, and it's hugely cost effective if you're looking at it in an economic terms.
Yes.
It doesn't cost you anything to forest bathe, and everyone can do it. It's you don't need any specialist skills to lead your own forest bathing experience. You need time, and you need an open mind. You do need access to rich green spaces where there are trees, and of course in many places that is becoming harder.
Stepping into forest for those who live in rural areas is easier than for those who live in an urban area. So how can people that live in a city or have less access to a forest what can they do? Any tips for them?
I would say, I mean, it depends on your circumstance. If you have access to woodlands or forests, then carve out some time and go and visit those spaces and put away your distractions.
Even the local park?
Yeah, the local park as well. So wherever you've got an interesting green space, I mean, it can be a back garden. It could even be from a balcony or through a window.
Mm-hmm.
If you are at home and you don't have access to those green spaces regularly, then you can apply so many of the principles of forest bathing through a window. And we know, the seminal studies way back in the 1980s, Dr. Roger Ulrich, that showed the impact of just observing a natural scene through a window has a huge impact on our body. He looked at it particularly around recovery rates of people who'd had abdominal surgery, comparing a group of patients who had a view from their recovery room to those that didn't have a view of a green space, and found that the patients who had a view of a green space recovered quicker, required less medication, and felt better. So, there's so much you can do just from the confines of your own home, just sort of connecting with the trees and the wildlife and the sounds and the sensory stimuli of the nature that's outside of your window or your front door.
Amazing. So basically, you can forest bathe anywhere in the world.
Anywhere.
Wherever there's some sort of a greenery, in any weather, sunshine, snow, rain. You don't even...
Any weather. Yeah.
It's preferable to have a forest, but you don't have to. And then once you've learned how to, hopefully with the guide, you can do it anywhere and enjoy the benefits from that practice, which is brilliant and amazing. One thing that I've read before we talked was nature deficit disorder. And basically is the idea of mostly children are spending less time outdoors and nature. And I just must say that this disorder is not recognized in any medical manuals as a mental disorder at all, but it's just described that the cost of spending less time outdoors is taking a toll on the children, and you'll see it in attention deficit. We talked ADHD, emotion illnesses, obesity, vitamin D deficiency. So tons and tons and tons of benefits for forest bathing. So I'm kind of like rooting for you. Yeah,
absolutely. Nature deficit disorder, which was like you say, a non-medical term, but it was coined by Richard Louv, who has done a huge amount of work around child development and play and outdoor play. And he coined that term to really describe that physical and mental well-being and health fallout of our distancing from nature. And actually in his work he said, you see it in children, but you see it in adults, you see it in communities, you see it in whole societies. I think it was nature deficit disorder that brought me to the practice of forest bathing and led me into sort of setting up Forest and Family and the whole forest school that we have there. It was a recognition that something was going on in my life that wasn't tallying. And it was a combination of factors. So, working in a stressful full-time job, mostly office-based, very much disconnected from nature. I took my then only daughter to a forest school on the grounds of the Eden Project, and I spent 2 hours watching her immersed in this state of self-directed play, playing with mud and other people and roasting marshmallows over the fire. And it was such a strong reminder of the difference between my very nature immersed childhood and the freedom that I had in my local park and in my garden, and the amount of times I just the real aha moment. But that was my aha moment for her, that I could see that she wasn't getting that, in living in London. But also my aha moment was when I came back to London after that 2-week break, and the difference in how I felt and the difference in how I was sleeping and how much calmer and less anxious I felt. And that really sort of led to me thinking about, well, what's different? And it wasn't just the break. It was that we had spent 2 weeks actually in a forest environment. We were staying in a sort of log hut deep within a forest, and I'd spent 2 weeks breathing in and inhaling and connecting with this very biodiverse, rich, natural forest environment. And as a consequence, on my lunch hour, I started leaving my office and going to seek out the nearest green spaces. And without knowing, I'd started two things. I'd started self-medicating on nature, and I'd started forest bathing.
Forest bathing seems like the medicine we can use for a lot of things. And I'm just curious to hear your thoughts in how we are disconnected, where we are with COVID, all the mental health. Is there something into that we are missing that maybe we can take advantage of?
It's been fascinating going through the last year with our focus on a virus and, microbes and small things that we're afraid of. And it does make me question, particularly as a forest school leader who promotes the value of soil contact and kids being dirty and boosting their microbiome by outdoor play. And yet we're living through an age where we've never been washing our hands so much and sterilizing everything. And, the hygiene hypothesis, which is that we are nowadays living too clean and it's having a detrimental impact on our microbiome, our gut health, which of course also relates to our mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And the other side of that is also this hypothesis around biodiversity hypothesis, which is that our bodies need a biodiverse environment to be healthy, that our immune systems actually expect to come into contact with certain bacteria. And if they don't do that when we're young and at an early age, that they're just not prepared for things that they will come into contact with in later life. So it's one of the reasons that we have such a sort of rapid rise in allergies and autoimmune disorders, particularly in societies where we are more distant from nature, where our bodies are becoming more distant from nature. And we can't be afraid of microbes because we need them. And again, there's been many studies around children that are brought up on farms having healthier immune systems and are less likely to suffer from allergens such as asthma, for example, because they've had that early year exposure to microbes, to healthy bacteria. So I welcome as we come out of the other side of the pandemic, I welcome a re-embracing of microbes and sort of a re-education of how important good bacteria and good microbes are for our health and well-being.
You mentioned the ecosystem. It's also the balance. It's the balance between we still need to wash our hands and social distance, especially now during the pandemic. But when we're going out to nature, it's okay to touch the tree bark. Yeah. It's okay to feel the soil, try to smell. So engage with nature what we cannot engage with people.
Yeah, I think suddenly we see green spaces and sort of, wild spaces being seen as the safe spaces, where you don't have to obsessively wash your hands and worry about who else has touched that particular tree or that particular stick. And so I really think there's an opportunity to seize on that. And parents are much more receptive now to the rationale behind nature connection and more so now than ever before, because our children need it more so now. And they've lost out on so much that, for a practice like forest school and forest bathing and nature connection gives them like a reset, really, which I think is great, going to be great for mental health and well-being.
What will be your 3 tips for anybody that want to give it a try? That will make it easier for him and her or her to actually do it.
The first tip would be go and find your tree. If you don't already have your tree, go out and see if you can find a tree that really resonates with you and really speaks to you. I always say there's nothing shameful about having a tree as a best friend. And I think forest bathing starts with really connecting with trees. And if you don't already have one, find a special one and start exploring that particular tree, get to know that tree. And I think from there, your practice could start to evolve. And find your green space, find the space where you feel safe, where you feel comfortable, and start experimenting with it. So, try some of these very simple techniques. You can find examples of invitations online, and there's various forest bathing books that give examples of the simple invitations that you can try out and combine it. If you have another practice that you do, whether it's walking or jogging or Tai Chi or yoga and meditation, then forest bathing is something that can be brought into those other kinds of practices, or you can bring those practices into forest bathing as well. So the more you want to do it, the more you realize you've missed doing it all of your life. So the more there really is no turning back once you start to immerse in this practice, because you see the transformation it has on you. You see the impact it has on your mood, on your energy, on your relationships with other people, and it's a powerful thing.
Wow. And I would add to that to walk without your phone. I think
definitely,
if you want to immerse yourself in nature,
switch that phone off. Yes. And we're so primed now to want to capture every moment on our phones, and of course nature is beautiful, so why wouldn't we want to capture it? But switching the phone off and avoiding the distractions.
I'm sure you have a special tree that you talk to. I'm not not in any disrespectful way. Do you have a favorite tree regardless?
My two special trees that I sort of hold closest would be the English oak and the Scots pine, and I wonder if that is partly to do with my dual English-Scottish heritage. I don't know, but the smell of the pine is just for me it's really powerful. And who wouldn't feel in a state of absolute awe and wonder looking at a big old English oak, in its full sort of majestic scale. So one of those or both of them.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for the enlightening conversation, Katie. I appreciate you sharing your wisdom and expertise on forest bathing, and I hope we manage to inspire others to just take a break in nature.
Thank you, Tali. It's been wonderful speaking to you.
And thank you, everyone, for joining me today. We are all beautiful butterflies, each in his and her individual ways. I wanted to thank you for joining me today in this episode. I really appreciate you coming on this journey with me, and I hope you can join me next time. And remember, it only takes a small action to make a big difference. Be a butterfly.
And that's all for this episode. Thank you for joining us today. Please subscribe to hear more of our stories of change.